They say that in your 60s, you're supposed to be settling into the quiet rhythm of your sunset years. They tell you to bake the pies, knit the sweaters, and mind your business. But what they don't tell you is that silence is where the secrets crawl. My name is Cassandra, and I've spent my life building a reputation for being the pillar of this community. I thought I knew every corner of my home and every soul under my roof. I was wrong. It started with my grandson, KJ. He's 5 years old, the light of my life. And since my daughter's passing, he's been my entire world. Lately, he'd started talking to the air. The tall man says you're tired, Nana, he'd whisper, his eyes fixed on the empty corner of the kitchen. I dismissed it. Kids have imaginations. I thought it was grief playing tricks on a little boy's mind. But then the tall man started giving KJ messages. Specific messages. Things only a dead man or a devil would know. The tall man says you still have the letters from 1994. KJ said one afternoon while pushing his toy cars across the hardwood. My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice. I haven't mentioned 1994 to his soul. That was the year my world was ripped apart by a betrayal so deep it nearly buried me. I looked at the empty hallway, the shadows stretching like long, dark fingers under the afternoon sun. There was nobody there. Yet, I felt a chill, a cold, calculated presence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I'm not a woman who scares easily. You don't survive what I've been through by being soft. But when I went to my bedroom that night and found my dresser drawer slightly ajar, the one I keep locked, I knew this wasn't a child's game. Someone had been in my room. Someone was using my grandson to taunt me. My daughter's widower, Quentin, moved back in with us 6 months ago. He's charming, soft-spoken, and the neighbors think he's a saint for staying so close to his mother-in-law. But when I looked at him across the dinner table that night, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. A hunger. A dark, jagged edge that didn't match his grieving husband act. KJ says he has a new friend, I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. I watched him closely as I cut my meat. Quentin didn't even look up. He just smiled. That slow, oily smile that never reached his eyes. Kids have active minds. Cassandra, maybe you're just getting a bit paranoid in your old age. Stress does that to a woman. He was gaslighting me in my own home. He was calling me crazy while he whispered poison into my grandson's ear. But here is the thing about being 60. People think you're invisible. They think you're slow. They think you've forgotten how to fight. Quentin has no idea who I really am. He thinks he's playing a game with an old lady. He doesn't realize he's stepped into a lion's den. And I am very, very hungry. The tall man isn't a ghost. He's a monster. And I'm about to show him exactly what happens when you try to take what belongs to me. I stayed up late that night, sitting in the dark with my father's old snub nose tucked into the cushion of my armchair. I watched the monitor in KJ's room. At 3 a.m., the door creaked open. A figure stepped in. It wasn't Quentin. It was someone I hadn't seen in 30 years, someone who should have been behind bars. The betrayal didn't just start. It was a decades-long plan, and my grandson was the bait. The betrayal is deeper than I ever imagined, and the person behind it is someone you will never expect. If you want to see how I handle this snake in my grass, you need to stay tuned. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. Before we continue, I need to know, have you ever felt like someone was watching you in your own home? Drop yes in the comments if you want to see what I have planned. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Vintage Vengeance is just getting started, and you don't want to miss the moment I take my life back. I sat in that dark living room until the sun began to bleed through the blinds, my fingers wrapped tight around the cold steel of my father's old piece. My mind was a whirlwind of memories I had buried under layers of prayer and hard work. The figure I saw on that baby monitor, the silhouette that moved with a predatory grace, wasn't just a stranger. It was a ghost from a life I thought I had burned to the ground. When the sun finally climbed high enough to turn the shadows into reality, I heard the floorboards groan upstairs. Quentin came down first, looking refreshed, wearing that expensive silk robe my daughter, Aaliyah, had bought him before she passed. He looked like a man without a care in the world, whistling a tune as he headed for the coffee pot. "Morning, Cassandra," he chirped, his voice smooth as grease. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink. Are those nerves acting up again? I told you, I can call Dr. Vance and get you something to help you settle down. We can't have you losing your mind in front of the boy." I didn't blink. I didn't even look at him. I just stared at the steam rising from my mug. "I'm fine, Quentin. Just thinking about the past. Funny how it has a way of crawling back up when you least expect it." He paused, the carafe midair. For a split second, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of something sharp, vicious, glinted in his eyes. "The past is for the dead, Cassandra. You should focus on the present, like making sure KJ is ready for his checkup today." He walked out, and I felt the air leave the room with him. I headed up to KJ's room. My grandson was sitting on his bed, staring at the closet door. He looked pale, his small hands trembling as he gripped his favorite teddy bear. "KJ, baby," I whispered, sitting beside him. "Tell Nana. Who was in here last night? Was it Daddy?" KJ shook his head slowly, his eyes wide with a terror no 5-year-old should ever know. "No, Nana. It was the tall man. He told me if I told you his real name, you'd go away like Mommy did." My heart shattered, then hardened into a diamond. My daughter's death had been ruled an accident, a tragic fall down a flight of stairs while I was out of town. I had mourned her, cried until my eyes were raw, and blamed God. But looking at my grandson's face, I realized I had been mourning a murder. "What is his name, KJ? I promise nobody is going anywhere," I urged, my voice a low, soothing hum. The boy leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. He said his name is Darnell. The room spun. Darnell, the man I had testified against 30 years ago, the man who had run a sophisticated ring of identity theft and home invasions until I, a young bank teller at the time, noticed the patterns and handed him over to the feds. He had sworn in that courtroom that he would dismantle my life piece by piece. I thought he had died in prison. I walked to my office and locked the door. I pulled out a hidden floorboard beneath my desk, a secret I kept even from my own children. Inside was a ledger. I started cross-referencing the dates Quentin entered Aaliyah's life with the date Darnell was released on parole. It matched perfectly. Quentin wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a plant. He was Darnell's protege, his inside man, who had spent years infiltrating my family, marrying my daughter, and likely ensuring she met her end so he could get closer to me. And whatever he thought I was hiding, they weren't after money. That's what a common thief wants. Darnell wanted my soul. He wanted to watch me lose my mind, my home, and my grandson before he finally put me in the ground. I heard a heavy footstep outside my office door. The handle turned slowly, but the lock held. "Cassandra, you in there?" Quentin's voice was different now. The charm was gone. It was cold, flat, and demanding. "I noticed you were looking through some old files earlier. You know, curiosity killed the cat." I slipped the ledger back into its hiding spot and stood up, smoothing my dress. I opened the door and stared him right in his lying face. And satisfaction brought it back. "Quentin," I said, my voice dripping with a newfound venom, "why don't you go check on KJ? I think he's ready for his friend to pay another visit." The look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face was the first victory I'd had in months. But I knew this was just the beginning. Darnell was close. He was likely in the guest house or the crawl space, watching me through the vents. They thought I was a frail old woman they could toy with. They forgot that I am the one who survived the 90s. I am the one who put a kingpin in a cage. And I am the one who knows exactly where the bodies are buried on this property, because I'm the one who dug the holes. I watched Quentin's back as he retreated down the hallway, his steps heavy with a new kind of hesitation. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one looking over my shoulder. He was, but I knew the predator doesn't stop just because the prey barks. He was going to report back to Darnell. He was going to tell his master that the old woman was waking up. I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the woman in the mirror. Gray hair, tired eyes, a map of 60 years of survival etched into my skin. They saw a victim. I saw a soldier. You think you can take my house? I whispered to the glass. You think you can take my daughter's life and then use her son as a plaything? Suddenly, the mirror fogged up. Not from the water. The air in the small room turned frigid, the kind of cold that sinks into your marrow. A single word was traced into the steam on the glass. Soon. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't scream. Screaming is for those who still believe someone is coming to save them. I wiped the glass clean with my palm, my breath hitching as I realized the handwriting matched the signature on the letters Darnell had sent me from his cell decades ago. He wasn't just in the house. He was mocking me. He was playing with his food. I walked out of the bathroom and headed straight for the basement. Quentin was in the kitchen, pretending to make a sandwich, but I could feel his eyes burning holes in my back. "Where are you going, Cassandra?" he called out, his voice pitched in that fake concerned tone. "You shouldn't be taking those stairs at your age. You might stumble, just like Aaliyah." I stopped dead. The mention of my daughter's accident was a jagged blade twisted in an old wound. I turned slowly, my face a mask of granite. Aaliyah didn't stumble. Quentin. She was pushed. And the person who did it is going to wish they had stayed in the pits of hell where they belong. I didn't wait for his response. I descended into the basement, the air smelling of damp earth and old memories. I went to the far corner, behind the heavy oak wardrobe that had belonged to my mother. I pushed it aside with a strength I didn't know I still possessed. Behind it was a small, reinforced steel door, the entrance to a fallout shelter my father had built during the Cold War. Nobody knew about this room. Not Aaliyah, and certainly not Quentin. Inside, the air was stale but dry. I flicked the switch, and a single bulb flickered to life, illuminating rows of monitors. Years ago, after Darnell was first sentenced, I became obsessed with security. I had wired this entire house with pinhole cameras, long before smart homes were a trend. I had stopped checking them years ago when I thought the danger was dead. I sat down at the console and pulled up the feed for the guest house at the edge of the property. The screen flickered, grainy and gray, but there he was, Darnell. He looked older, his face scarred, and his hair white, but those eyes, those cold, hollow eyes, were unmistakable. He was sitting in a chair, watching a monitor of his own. On his screen was a live feed of KJ's bedroom. He was watching my grandson sleep. My stomach turned. This wasn't just revenge for the prison time. This was a sick, twisted obsession. Darnell had spent 30 years dreaming of replacing me, of taking my lineage and molding it into his own image. Quentin was just the tool, the father figure, who would hand the boy over once I was eliminated. I watched as Quentin entered the guest house on the screen. He looked frantic. "She knows, Darnell," Quentin hissed, his voice coming through the hidden mics I'd installed decades ago. "The old lady is onto us. She mentioned Aaliyah. She's not scared, she's dangerous." Darnell didn't even turn around. He reached out and touched the screen where KJ's face was visible. She's a grandmother. Quentin. She's a relic. If she's becoming a problem, then it's time for her to join her daughter. But do it quietly. I want the boy to think she just left him. I want him to hate her memory. The level of depravity made my blood boil. They weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to murder my legacy. I leaned back in my chair, a dark smile spreading across my face. They thought they were the ones watching. They thought they held the cards. But they didn't know that I had already recorded every word of that conversation. They didn't know that I had the evidence to bury them both. But the police? No. Calling the cops was too easy. Darnell had survived prison once. He'd find a way out again. This required a more permanent solution. A cold, aggressive vengeance that would ensure they never saw the sun again. I reached for the old shortwave radio on the desk. It was time to call in a favor from a man I hadn't spoken to since 1994, a man who specialized in making people disappear without a trace. "This is Cassandra," I said into the receiver, my voice steady. "The snake is in the garden. It's time to bring the shovel." The crackle of the shortwave radio was the only sound in the bunker, a rhythmic static that felt like the heartbeat of a ghost. I waited, my knuckles white as I gripped the plastic casing. Then a voice came through, deep, gravelly, and sounding like it had been dragged over miles of jagged rock. "Cassandra? I thought you were dead, or transitioned to glory by now," the voice rasped. It was Elias, a man who had worked in the shadows of the city long before I even knew what a shadow was. He owed me. In 1994, I didn't just give the feds Darnell. I diverted a paper trail that would have put Elias in a cage for life. I kept his name clean, and he promised me a debt that never expired. "I'm still here, Elias," I said, my voice cold as a winter morning. "But I have a pest problem. 2 of them. One is a snake named Quentin, and the other is a rat named Darnell. He's back, Elias, and he's in my house." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear Elias shifting his weight, the gravity of the name Darnell sinking in. Darnell was supposed to be a memory. "Cassandra, if he's at your door, he isn't there for your silver. He's there for your blood. He already took my daughter." I whispered, the words catching in my throat before I hardened them into iron. "He's trying to take my grandson now. I don't want a trial. I don't want a police report. I want them removed. Cleanly. Aggressively. Consider it a down payment on my soul," Elias replied. "I'll be there by midnight. Keep your eyes open, Cassandra. A cornered rat bites hardest." I clicked the radio off and turned back to the monitors. On the screen, I watched Quentin leave the guest house and head back toward the main building. He looked agitated, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette, a habit he usually hid from me to keep up his perfect son-in-law persona. He was cracking. Darnell was pushing him, and I was rattling him. I left the bunker and climbed the stairs back into the kitchen. I moved with a deliberate slowness, playing the part of the tired, aging grandmother. I started humming a hymn, "Precious Lord, take my hand," knowing it would grate on Quentin's nerves. He was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the woods that border my property. "You're humming again, Cassandra," he snapped, his voice tight. "It's giving me a headache." "Just soothing my soul, Quentin," I said, reaching for a heavy cast-iron skillet. "KJ is napping. I thought I'd fry up some chicken. You look like you need a good meal. You're looking a bit thin, like you're carrying a heavy burden." He turned to look at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of a trap. I gave him a blank, grandmotherly smile. I was the picture of innocence. "I'm going out for a bit," he said, grabbing his keys. "I need some air." "Don't stay out too long," I warned softly. "The woods get dark early this time of year, and you never know what's lurking in the trees." As soon as his car pulled down the gravel driveway, I moved. I didn't have much time. I went to the guest house, my heart hammering. I didn't go to the front door. I went to the crawl space access at the rear. I knew this house inside out. I designed the renovations myself after my husband passed. I slid inside the cramped, earthy space, pulling a small electronic device from my pocket. It was a signal jammer. If Darnell was using high-tech surveillance to watch me, I was about to blind him. I planted it near the main junction box and flipped the switch. Suddenly, I heard a heavy thud directly above my head. "Quentin, is that you back already?" A voice boomed from the room above. It was Darnell. The sound of his voice, the man who had orchestrated my daughter's accident, made my vision swim with a red haze. The feed went out. Darnell growled, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards inches from my face. "That old woman, she's doing something. I can feel it. She's too quiet." I held my breath, pressed against the cold dirt, praying my lungs wouldn't betray me. I heard him move toward the door. He was going to the main house. He was going to find out I wasn't in the kitchen frying chicken. I scrambled out of the crawl space, my clothes stained with soot, and ran toward the back of the property. I didn't go to the house. I went to the old tool shed. Inside, tucked behind a stack of rusted lawnmowers, was a heavy plastic jug. It wasn't gasoline. It was something much more clever. I walked back toward the guest house, staying in the shadows of the towering oaks. I began to pour the liquid in a wide circle around the perimeter of the small building. It was an accelerant used in professional pyrotechnics, odorless, colorless, and nearly impossible to extinguish once it caught. They wanted to play with fire. I was about to give them an inferno. I saw Darnell's silhouette on the porch of the main house, looking through the windows, searching for me. He looked like a wolf hunting a lamb. He didn't realize the lamb had already sharpened her teeth. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. "I'm at the gate. The shovel is ready." Elias was here. I looked up at the guest house, then at the main house where Darnell was standing. The trap was set. The betrayal that had started 30 years ago was coming to a screaming halt tonight. The night air was thick, heavy with the scent of pine, and the looming threat of rain. I stood in the deep shadows of the tool shed, watching Darnell prowl my back porch like he owned the wood it was built from. He was looking for me, his head cocked to the side, listening for the hum of a hymn or the clatter of a skillet. He didn't hear a thing. I had become the silence he so desperately feared. A low whistle, like the call of a midnight bird, drifted from the edge of the driveway. I moved toward it, my sneakers crunching softly on the gravel. There, leaning against a blacked-out sedan with the engine killed, was Elias. He looked exactly the same, a mountain of a man with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that had seen too many ends to ever be afraid of a beginning. "Cassandra," he grunted, nodding toward the house. "You weren't joking. That rat is standing on your porch like he's the king of the castle. He thinks the castle is empty. Elias," I whispered, my voice cold and sharp. "He thinks I'm a senile old woman who's lost her grip. He doesn't know I've been holding the rope this entire time." Elias opened his trunk. Inside wasn't just a shovel. There were zip ties, a heavy-duty taser, and a small silver briefcase. "You said you wanted a permanent solution. You sure about this? Once we step onto that porch, there's no calling the law. There's no turning back to the good grandmother routine." I looked up at the window of KJ's room. My grandson was in there, sleeping fitfully, haunted by a tall man who was really a demon in a designer suit. I thought of my daughter, Aaliyah, and the way her laughter used to fill these halls before it was silenced by a stumble. "I buried my daughter, Elias," I said, turning back to him. My eyes were flat, dead to any mercy. "I'm not burying my grandson. Let's go." We moved through the trees, circling the guest house first. I knew Quentin would be back any minute. He was the weak link, the errand boy who thought he was a mastermind. We waited in the brush until his headlights cut through the dark, sweeping over the gravel. He parked the car, his movements jerky and panicked. He ran toward the guest house, likely to tell Darnell that the signal was jammed. He never made it to the door. Elias moved like a shadow. One moment Quentin was fumbling with his keys, and the next, he was face down in the dirt with a knee in the small of his back. He didn't even have time to gasp before the zip ties bit into his wrists. "Check his pockets," I commanded, stepping out from the darkness. Elias pulled out a burner phone and a set of blueprints. My blueprints. They weren't just looking for my secrets. They were looking for the deed to the property and the offshore accounts Darnell thought I'd managed to hide from the feds back in the 90s. Quentin looked up at me, his face smeared with mud and tears. "Cassandra, please. He made me do it. He said he'd kill me if I didn't help him. He's a monster." I leaned down, my face inches from his. The smell of his fear was better than any perfume. "You married my daughter to get to me. You watched her die so you could stay in this house. You are not a victim, Quentin. You are an infection, and I am the cure." I looked at Elias. "Take him to the basement, the fallout shelter. I want him to see exactly how much I've been watching." "What about the big one?" Elias asked, gesturing toward the main house where Darnell was now stepping off the porch, sensing something was wrong. "Leave Darnell to me," I said, reaching into my pocket for the small remote that controlled the perimeter lights. "He's been waiting 30 years for a showdown. It's time I gave him his wish." As Elias dragged a muffled, kicking Quentin toward the side entrance, I stepped into the light of the driveway. I stood there, lone and tall, a 60-year-old woman in a floral housecoat, looking like the easiest target in the world. Darnell stopped. He saw me. A slow, predatory grin spread across his scarred face. He pulled a blade from his pocket, the same kind of blade the coroner said caused those irregular lacerations on my daughter's arms. "There you are, Cassandra," Darnell called out, his voice a jagged rasp. "I was starting to think you'd grown wings and flown away. You ready to join Aaliyah? She's been waiting for you." "She's not the one waiting for you, Darnell," I shouted back, my voice echoing off the trees. "Hell is. And I've already bought your ticket." I pressed the button on the remote. The perimeter lights didn't just turn on, they strobed with a blinding, disorienting intensity. At the same moment, the odorless accelerant I'd poured around the guest house ignited. A wall of blue flame erupted, cutting off the path back to his hideout. Darnell stumbled back, shielding his eyes, his tall man persona crumbling into a confused, aging thug. He was trapped between a fire he couldn't smell and a woman he couldn't break. The wall of blue flame roared toward the sky, casting long, dancing shadows that made the trees look like skeletal giants. Darnell stood frozen in the center of the driveway, the strobe lights flickering against his panicked face. The tall man didn't look so tall anymore. He looked small. He looked hunted. "You think a little fire is going to stop me, Cassandra?" he yelled over the crackle of the brush. He gripped his knife tighter, his knuckles white. "I survived a maximum security hole for 3 decades. I survived men that make you look like a saint. You're just a grandmother in a drafty house. I'm the grandmother who put you in that hole," I shouted back, stepping forward into the light. I didn't have a gun in my hand. I didn't need one yet. I had something better. I had the truth, and it was heavier than lead. "You didn't survive because you were tough, Darnell. You survived because I let you. I could have had you ended in that yard 20 years ago, but I wanted you to come home. I wanted you to see everything you lost." He lunged. It was a desperate, clumsy move, driven by rage rather than skill. I stepped back, my heels clicking on the pavement, and as he swung the blade, A heavy hand reached out from the darkness behind him. Elias didn't use a weapon. He used his weight. He caught Darnell's wrist in a grip that sounded like dry wood snapping. The knife clattered to the ground. Before Darnell could even scream, Elias had him pinned against the hood of my car, his face pressed into the cold metal. "You move, and I'll make sure you never walk again," Elias whispered in his ear. I walked over and picked up the knife. I recognized the handle. It was a custom piece, something he'd boasted about back in the 90s. I felt a surge of cold, calculated fury. This was the steel that had terrorized my daughter. "Take him to the basement," I said, my voice a flat, dead calm. "I want them together." Elias dragged a cursing, spitting Darnell toward the side door. I followed, stopping only to look up at KJ's window. The boy was still asleep, shielded by the thick, soundproof glass I'd installed years ago. He would wake up in a world where the tall man was gone forever. We descended into the belly of the house. The air in the fallout shelter was different now. It felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. In the corner, Quentin was huddled on the floor, his eyes bulging as he saw his mentor being tossed into the room like a bag of trash. "Darnell," Quentin stammered, his voice cracking. She knew everything. Darnell looked at Quentin with pure disgust. "You pathetic coward. You had one job, to keep her sedated and confused. You let a 60-year-old woman dismantle a 30-year plan in a single night." "Actually," I interrupted, sitting down in the high-backed chair in front of the monitors. "It took me 48 hours. I had to wait for the accelerant to arrive." I leaned forward, the glow of the screens reflecting in my eyes. I hit a button, and the monitors began to play a loop. It wasn't the live feed. It was footage from 3 years ago. It showed Quentin in the kitchen of their old apartment, dropping a clear liquid into my daughter Aaliyah's tea. It showed her becoming dizzy. It showed him leading her toward the stairs. Quentin's face went gray. How do you have that? That wasn't this house." "I told you, Quentin," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I've been watching. I paid for that apartment. I installed the security. I saw what you did to my baby girl. I've seen it every night for 3 years. I just needed you to bring the big red out of hiding, so I could catch you both in the same trap." The betrayal wasn't just Darnell coming for me. It was Quentin, a man my daughter loved, systematically poisoning her life until he could end it. They thought they were playing a game of chess. They didn't realize I had owned the board since before they were born. "What are you going to do?" Darnell hissed, his eyes darting toward the heavy steel door. "You kill us. The police will find out. You're a pillar of the community. Cassandra, you can't afford the stain." "The police aren't coming, Darnell," I said, standing up and walking toward the door. "And I'm not going to kill you. That's too easy. That's what people like you do." I looked at Elias, who was already heading for the exit. He knew the plan. "I'm just going to let the house do what it was built for," I said. "This room is airtight. It's soundproof. And the only person who knows the combination to that door is me. You wanted my home, Darnell? Well, now you have it. All of it." As I stepped out, I heard Quentin start to wail. Darnell threw himself at the door, but it was 4 inches of solid steel. "Cassandra, you can't do this." Darnell's voice was muffled, sounding like it was coming from miles underground. "Watch me," I whispered. The heavy steel door clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my soul. I stood in the narrow hallway of the basement, listening. At first, there was a frantic pounding, the sound of Darnell's fists against the metal. Then came Quentin's muffled screams, high-pitched and jagged with the realization that his charm couldn't talk his way out of a tomb. I looked at Elias. He was wiping his hands on a rag, his face as unreadable as a tombstone. "You're sure about this, Cassandra? Once I leave, there's no one else to hold the mirror up to what you've done tonight." I've spent 3 years looking in the mirror and seeing a woman who let her daughter's killer sleep under her roof. I said, my voice like dry leaves. Tonight, I'm looking at a woman who finally cleaned her house. Go on, Elias. Your debt is paid. Take the black car and vanish. I'll handle the boy. Elias nodded once, a gesture of grim respect, and disappeared up the stairs. I stayed in the basement for a moment longer. I walked over to the ventilation controls. There was a dial there that managed the oxygen flow to the fallout shelter. My father had built it to last for months, but he had also built a manual override in case of a fire. I didn't turn it off. I wasn't a monster. Not yet. I just turned it down. Just enough so they would feel every breath they took. Just enough so the air would grow heavy, thick with the smell of their own fear and the ghosts they had created. I climbed the stairs back into the main house. The smell of the fire from the guest house was still lingering, a smoky, bitter scent that clung to the curtains. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the tap. I washed my hands, scrubbing until the skin turned pink, watching the soot from the crawl space swirl down the drain. Suddenly, the house felt too quiet. The humming of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It all felt like it was waiting for something. Nana! I froze. I turned to see KJ standing in the doorway, his small pajamas rumpled, his eyes wide and glassy. He was holding his teddy bear by the ear. Nana, where's Daddy? And where's the tall man? My heart squeezed. I walked over and knelt in front of him, smoothing his hair. The tall man had to go away. Baby, he went to a place where he can't hurt anyone ever again. And your daddy, he had to go help him. KJ looked at the basement door. He was a smart boy, too smart for his own good. Is the tall man under the floor? I felt a chill run down my spine. Children see things we spend our lives trying to unsee. He's gone, KJ. That's all you need to know. Tomorrow, we're going to go on a trip. Just you and me. We're going to see the ocean. Will Mommy be there? The question hit me like a physical blow. I pulled him into a hug, burying my face in his neck so he wouldn't see the tears finally breaking through the ice I built around my heart. Mommy is in the wind. Baby, she's in the trees. And she's very, very proud of you for being so brave. I led him back to bed, singing that same hymn until his breathing evened out. But as I sat in the rocker in his room, I heard a sound from the floorboards below. A rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't Darnell. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It was a code. I realized then that Darnell hadn't just been a thief or a killer. He was a man who had spent 30 years in a cell learning how to communicate through stone and steel. He wasn't just begging for mercy. He was signaling. I stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, down the long gravel driveway that led to the main road, I saw a flash of light. A single, brief pulse of a high beam. Darnell wasn't alone. He had a third player on the board. The betrayal went even deeper than Quentin. There was someone else who wanted what was under this house, and they were officially at my gate. The pulse of those high beams in the distance felt like a lightning strike to my soul. I stood by the window in KJ's room, my hand resting on the glass. The guest house was still smoldering, a heap of blackened wood and glowing embers, but my eyes were fixed on the edge of the property. Who was left? I had the mastermind and the messenger locked in a steel box beneath my feet. But as the lights flickered again, 3 short bursts, I realized the terrifying truth. Darnell hadn't just come for me with a plan. He had come with backup. I grabbed my shawl and headed downstairs, my mind racing. I went back to the basement, not to the fallout shelter door, but to the monitoring station. I pulled up the feed for the front gate. A silver SUV was idling there. The driver's side window rolled down, and a woman's hand emerged, flicking a cigarette into the night. I zoomed in. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was Tiana. Tiana was my daughter's best friend. She had been the one to hold my hand at the funeral. She was the one who brought over casseroles and helped me sort through Aaliyah's clothes. She had sat at my kitchen table for months, listening to me grieve, all while she was the third architect of my destruction. The betrayal felt like a physical weight, crushing the air out of my lungs. She wasn't just a friend. She was the one who had introduced Aaliyah to Quentin. She had handpicked the wolf to lead my daughter to the slaughter. I picked up the intercom for the gate. The party's over, Tiana. Go home before you find yourself in a hole you can't climb out of. There was a long silence. Then a voice came through the speaker, soft, melodic, and chillingly calm. I can't do that, Cassandra. Darnell has something of mine. And I know you have him. Open the gate, or I'll call the one group of people you really don't want on your lawn tonight. The police. I scoffed, though my hand was trembling. No, Tiana whispered. The people Darnell owes money to. They aren't as patient as I am. And they won't care if a 5-year-old boy is in the house when they start shooting. She wasn't just a traitor. She was an extortionist. She was willing to put KJ in the crosshairs to get whatever leverage Darnell had promised her. I realized then that the tall man wasn't just a ghost. He was a debt. Darnell had promised these people something hidden on my land, something from the old days that he'd buried before the feds took him in 1994. I looked at the monitor showing the interior of the fallout shelter. Darnell was sitting on the floor, his head tilted back, a smug look on his face. He knew she was here. He knew his insurance policy had arrived. I felt a cold, aggressive resolve wash over me. I wasn't going to be a victim. Not tonight. Not ever again. I opened the gate. Come on up, Tiana. I said into the mic, let's finish this face-to-face. I went to the kitchen and pulled a heavy bag of lye from the pantry, something I used for the garden. I also grabbed a bottle of high-proof bourbon from the liquor cabinet. I moved with the precision of a woman half my age. I wasn't just a grandmother anymore. I was a chemist of vengeance. I heard the gravel crunch as her SUV pulled up. I stood on the porch, the moonlight catching the gray in my hair. Tiana stepped out, looking sleek in a leather jacket, a far cry from the morning friend she pretended to be. Where are they? She asked, not wasting time on pleasantries. They're where they belong, I said, stepping aside to let her in. But before you see them, I think you should know what Darnell was actually planning. He wasn't going to share the score with you, Tiana. He told Quentin you were the disposable one. Tiana laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Nice try, Cassandra. You're trying to play us against each other. It won't work. Darnell needs me to move the product. Product? I asked, my brow furrowing. You think there's drugs buried here? Tiana, you really are a fool. There's no product. There's only a ledger. A ledger with the names of every crooked cop and city official Darnell worked with in the 90s. Including your father. Tiana froze. Her father had been a decorated captain who died a hero. If that ledger comes out, your family's legacy is ashes. I continued, stepping closer to her. Darnell wasn't using you as a partner. He was using you as a shield. He knew you'd do anything to keep your father's name clean. The look of doubt in her eyes was all I needed. I reached out and grabbed her arm, my grip like a vice. Now, let's go down to the basement. I think it's time for a family meeting. I led Tiana down the basement stairs, the air growing colder with every step. She held a small, silver pistol in her right hand, her knuckles white. She thought she was the one in control because she had the steel. She didn't realize that in this house, I was the one who controlled the very air she was breathing. Keep moving, Cassandra, she hissed, her voice trembling just enough to show me she was terrified. No more talking. Just open the door. We reached the heavy steel vault. I stood before the keypad, my shadow stretched long and jagged against the concrete wall. I turned to look at her, my eyes filled with a pity that cut deeper than any insult. You were like a second daughter to me, Tiana, I whispered. When Aaliyah died, I cried on your shoulder. I shared my bread with you. How do you sleep at night, knowing you helped the man who broke her neck? I didn't have a choice, she snapped, the mask of the cool professional finally shattering. Darnell had the files. If he leaked what my father did, the payoffs, the setups, everything we built would be gone. My house, my career, my name. I couldn't let him ruin me for something a dead man did 30 years ago. So you ruined my life instead. I said, it wasn't a question. It was a sentence. I punched in the code. The heavy bolts shunted back with a sound like a guillotine dropping. The door swung open. The sight inside was pathetic. Quentin was curled in a fetal position in the corner, his expensive clothes stained with sweat and tears. Darnell was standing, his face pressed against the far vent, gasping for the thin air I'd allowed them. When the door opened, he lunged toward us, but the sight of Tiana's gun stopped him cold. Tiana! Darnell rasped, his voice a dry wheeze. The old woman, she's insane. She's got the house rigged. Get me out of here, and we'll find the ledger. We'll burn it all. Tiana looked at him, then at me, her gaze darting like a trapped animal. Where is it, Darnell? Where's the ledger? Darnell pointed a shaky finger at me. She knows. She's had it the whole time. She used it to bait us here. I stepped into the center of the room, looking at the three of them, the mastermind, the traitor, and the coward. A trifecta of betrayal. There is no ledger, I said softly. The silence that followed was absolute. What? Tiana whispered, the gun lowering an inch. My father burned those files in 1995, I said, a cold smile spreading across my face. He didn't want that poison in the world. I let you believe they existed because I knew your greed and your fear would bring you all to my doorstep. I needed you all in one place. I needed to see the look on your faces when you realized you killed my daughter for absolutely nothing. Darnell let out a guttural roar of rage and charged. But he was weak from the lack of oxygen. Tiana panicked and fired. The bullet didn't hit Darnell. It ricocheted off the steel wall and struck the ventilation control box, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The lights flickered and died. We were plunged into a darkness so thick you could feel it on your skin. Tiana? Darnell? Quentin's voice rose in a frantic scream. I didn't move. I knew every inch of this room. I knew where the emergency latch was, and I knew where the secondary seal was located. In the dark, I was the only one who could see. I felt for the heavy bag of lye I'd brought down earlier and the bottle of bourbon. You want to know about the tall man, Tiana? I called out into the blackness. My voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. He's not a ghost. He's the weight of every lie you've ever told. And tonight, he's coming to collect. I poured the bourbon onto the floor, the sharp medicinal scent filling the cramped space. Then I began to spread the lie. When mixed with moisture, the sweat on their skin, the tears in their eyes, it would burn. It was a slow, aggressive heat. Cassandra, please. Tiana begged, the sound of her scuffling against the floor echoing. We can make a deal. I'll tell the police everything. I'll testify against them. The time for deals ended when my daughter hit the floor, I said. I backed out of the room, my hand finding the edge of the door. I pulled it shut. This time, I didn't just lock it. I jammed the mechanism from the outside. I walked up the stairs, leaving the screams behind me. I went into the kitchen and made a cup of tea. My hands were perfectly steady. The house was finally quiet. The imaginary friend was gone, replaced by a very real, very permanent silence. But as I sat there, I realized one thing. The car at the gate, the SUV Tiana had arrived in, was still running. And as I looked at the monitor, I saw the back door of the vehicle open. A man stepped out. He wasn't a thug. He was wearing a suit. He looked like a lawyer. The betrayal had one more layer, and this one was holding a legal document. The man in the suit walked up my driveway with the confidence of someone who owned the ground he walked on. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a bureaucrat. But in my experience, the men with the pens do more damage than the men with the guns. I met him on the porch, my tea still steaming in my hand, the screams from the basement, now nothing more than a faint vibration beneath my feet. Mrs. Cassandra, the man asked, adjusted his spectacles. He held a leather briefcase like a shield. My name is Julian. I'm the executor of your daughter's secondary estate, the one she set up without your knowledge. My heart skipped a beat. Aaliyah didn't have a secondary estate. She had me. Julian offered a thin, pitying smile. She had a secret, Mrs. Cassandra. She knew what Quentin was. She knew about Darnell. And she knew that if she died, you would do exactly what you've done tonight. She loved you, but she feared your darkness. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a deed or a ledger. It was a confession, written in Aaliyah's own hand. She had documented everything Quentin had done to her, every whisper she'd overheard between him and Darnell. But at the bottom, there was a clause. If the contents of this letter were ever used to enact vigilante justice, the entire property, the house, the land, and the trust for KJ would be forfeited to the state. She wanted to protect you from yourself, Julian whispered. She knew that if you took revenge, you'd lose the one thing that matters, the boy. If those men are dead, or if they are missing, the authorities will come. And when they do, KJ will be taken. You'll be in a cell, and he'll be in the system. I looked at the man, then at the basement door. I had the monsters in a cage, but the cage was made of glass. If I shattered them, I shattered my grandson's future. The betrayal wasn't just from my enemies. It was a final, desperate plea from my own daughter to stay human. I walked back into the house, Julian following silently. I went to the basement door and looked at the keypad. My finger hovered over the release. I thought about the fire, the lie, and the 3 years of salt I'd tasted in my tears. Then I heard it. A small, soft voice from the top of the stairs. Nana, is the tall man gone yet? I looked up. KJ was standing there, his eyes clear for the first time in months. The shadow was gone from his face. He didn't need me to be a killer. He needed me to be his Nana. I turned to Julian. There are 3 people in my basement. They are alive. They are guilty of conspiracy, attempted murder, and the death of my daughter. You have the confession. I have the video evidence of their crimes. Call the police. Tell them the pillar of the community caught the wolves in her trap. I didn't kill them. I did something worse. I gave them to the law with so much evidence they would never see a sunrise again. As the sirens began to wail in the distance, I watched the police drag Darnell, Quentin, and Tiana out into the harsh glare of the spotlight. They weren't legends. They were just broken, middle-aged failures blinking at the sun. Darnell looked at me as they shoved him into the car. You think you won? You're still old, Cassandra. You're still alone. I'm not alone, Darnell, I said, holding KJ's hand tight. I'm free. And you? You're just a ghost I'm finally done talking to. I watched the red and blue lights fade into the night. The house was mine. The boy was safe. The vengeance was cold, but the future was finally warm. Cassandra proved that the ultimate power isn't in taking a life. It's in taking back your own. She broke the cycle of violence to save the next generation. And in doing so, she buried the tall man forever. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of a grandmother's unbreakable love. If this gave you chills, you must subscribe to Vintage Vengeance right now. We bring you the most intense, controversial, and gripping stories of justice every week. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a chapter. Comment legacy below if you're standing with Cassandra tonight. Thank you for watching. And remember, never underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose.